To measure the lens mount to film plane distance, you need something to measure against. You could just put film in the camera, that would certainly do it. I've got an old pressure plate that I've taken. You can see I've machined out 4 small pockets there. That's so that it'll sit here in those positions, but it's not being lifted up. It's floating on the film rails. It's not floating on those 4 positions there. They are there to space the pressure plate from the film plane. So by machining little pockets in here, this drops down and rubs on the rails. It's where the film would be. See if I can get the back closed on it, of course. Yeah, that's better. Right, so with the shutter set to B, you can cock that. Put my locking cable release in place and open the shutter. Now, where are we measuring from and to? These brass areas here, that's where we're measuring from. It's from that point to the film plane, which is the inside of that plate I've put in there. So I've got this adapter on the bottom of my Michu Toyo, and I'm just checking to see what it tells me. And right in the middle, it's telling me that my distance between here and the film plane is 47.74 millimeters. We've got to reduce that to 47.6. So I'm checking to see if I've got these fairly even. They're not miles away. I'll tighten the 4 screws down about half a turn each, I think, to start with. And check again. Forty 47.63 it's telling me. So I'm pretty close. I'll tighten them down a little bit more. Just at probably about 20 degrees I'm turning those screws. I'm not turning them far at all. .6. Now that would be bang on, but of course I don't know if it's even across the film plane in both directions. So I've got to try and get a measurement as close as I can back towards the corners. That's 47.6 heading this way. .6 in that corner. .59 in that corner, so I'll back that screw up just extremely slightly. And I want to see if I can get a measurement over in this direction. 47.6. .59, so I still need to lift to come up at that corner. Of course, this isn't made of rubber, so you change the tension on one of these screws, it may change the setting somewhere else, not just localised to that particular corner. 47.59. Yeah, it's pretty stubborn. It's at that corner. 6 if I measure across there. 47.6 I mean. 47.6. .6. So I think I'm just about right. Difficult making sure you've got the base on those brass areas. Okay, 47.8 it says there, so I'm going to slacken this screw off slightly. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm working backwards and forwards between the screws, the 4 screws, tightening or loosening them until I get a consistent 47.6mm reading. It's slightly under. I'll just keep going at this until I've satisfied that I'm getting the same reading all the way across. And I'm not at the moment, I'm 47.59 diagonally across there. I'll keep going at this for a minute or so and I'll come back. Well, I'm getting consistent readings, so I'm quite happy with that now. I've got that adjusted correctly. And next thing to do on this camera is to install the front control rings. Now, the meter drum we left set correctly in position. The slot in the front of the meter drum sat roughly towards the 11 o'clock position. I'm just putting some molybdenum paste on the pinion, particularly at the end where it's got to be pushed down into that slot in the drum. Line it up roughly, put it in position in the body. Now I've got to rotate it and at least keep some pressure on it till it drops into place. Yeah, just fell into place. That went smoothly. I'm just running some molybdenum paste through the pivot of that little pinion there and stick that on its post. Now, don't be moving that pinion around or moving the wheel at this stage because you'll upset your setting of your meter or the drum. You'll upset the position of the drum relative to the front dials, and that's important. The setting of our meter at the top there we're still to do, but you don't want to upset that position because otherwise you'll end up in a situation where you'll come to the end of the cord before the wheels stop moving and something will break. That's good. Now to put the other components back in place. First I need to clean these. Now this camera, the front controls were very sticky. So looking at this, I'm looking to see what we can see. There's a lot of dirt in here. It looks like dried grease. This piece in particular is a bit sticky feeling. Now that's grease. And here's this is the aperture scale ring here. And again, that's grease on there that I can see. And this piece here, that's quite obviously dirty. So I've cleaned these pieces with naphtha. Take care with these plastic pieces on here. They're easily damaged. It's not uncommon for them to be cracked. They're held on with 2 small screws. It's not uncommon if those screws loosen up that there'll be undue pressure on the other, where the other fixing point is, and they'll break. So I'm just checking that those screws are tight. That one's loose. It's not even vaguely finger tight. And I'll clean these components up with naphtha and a cotton bud and then show you how to put them back on the camera correctly. The most important factor probably at this stage is that that meter drum hasn't moved from the time we set it there before we put the front of the camera on. If you've put this in here and you started winding on that wheel left and right, it will have moved. You're going to be in deep trouble. I'm busy cleaning these surfaces, and this is the brass component, and you see there's a patch of corrosion right here. Now it's very localised. The only way you get a localised patch of corrosion like that is if it got splashed. A drop of moisture has got in there into that mount, and that's just created a rough spot here. So I'm just scraping, making sure that there's no lumps and bumps on there. And that all the other surfaces are likewise nice and clean. Now the discoloration here is of no importance at all. The last component I need to clean here is the shutter speed ring. As I said earlier, be careful of those plastic components. Don't get your naphtha on there, or don't get lots of it on there. They'll lose their shiny finish if they get solvent on them. And whatever you do, don't get acetone anywhere near them. This has got a bit of a rough look around here. I don't know what's caused that. It feels rough inside here. I don't know whether that's original manufacturing. It appears that it is. That's where it's been. It looks like that's where it was punched out, where it was pressed. And it looks to me like the tool was either blunt or they didn't lubricate the sheet prior to punching it. That's quite unusual. You don't normally see things like that. Okay, so I can put these components together. So I'll start with this piece. And we start with this piece. There's a little hook on here that couples to the spring. Find that. Get that hooked into position. Well, it's better if I start from the right direction, I suppose. Back to front here. That's better. I wondered why it wouldn't fit. Stretch that spring out, and this little tab drops into the slot in the ring. Just checking that those pieces move smoothly. That appears fine. If there was a little bit of reluctance there and I knew they were clean, I'd put a bit of graphite powder in there and work it backwards and forwards. But that's working fine as it is. This brass component, I'm just giving the lightest of wipes of molybdenum paste around the inside and outside and the top and bottom edges. Not enough to hardly leave a dirty mark. And getting this correctly positioned on here, you can see that slot across here. That's your alignment mark. That slot must line up with the end of this curved track recess. It must be right there against the end of that slot. That's the correct position. That is where that goes back on the camera. The shutter speed settings dial here can go on the camera itself. Now this actually disconnects from the settings at the B position. That's because you can move the ring beyond the B position. So this notch here is where it locks into the shutter speed settings lever, and this little crescent here, I'm wiping that with a bit of molybdenum paste. Now the shutter speed is set to B on the camera. If I get this ring in place, it's just seated now, it's correctly coupled. And holding this without disturbing anything, making sure that that notch is lined up, I get this in place so that the little red dot, the f1.9 is at the top, this is all in place, and put that straight on the camera. It should drop into place with only a moderate amount of wiggling. I'm just checking that, not sure of the feel of that. Okay, I'm going to try it at that point. We've got 3 screws that hold the front rings in place. They're chrome plated brass, easily damaged. If you get an ugly one, put it at the top and put a daub of red paint on it. It'll serve as an auxiliary alignment mark for when you're putting your lenses back. It doesn't look out of place. It looks exactly as you'd expect. Okay, so I've got my shutter speeds rings in place, aperture settings rings in place. I think everything's set to go there. I'm going to see if the shutter speed changes smoothly. It does, and you can see that the meter drum's revolving there. As I counter rotate these, you'll see, well, as I move that, you'll see that the aperture speed settings move, counter rotate, and it's only when you get to the end of the scale it goes beyond that. Right, so that all looks good. What I'm checking now is to make sure that this will go all the way from B, all the way from 2/50th to an f22 through to a 500th at f1.9 and f22. So the whole range of shutter speeds and settings that are available there. And that means that I've got my drum correctly positioned relative to the front rings. It means that this will move through a full arc without coming through to the end of the cable. So it means that the cable's not under any stress. As I move the wheel on the base of the camera, you see you can set your shutter speed and you can move your aperture setting by moving the wheel. It moves the meter drum at the top of the camera at the same time. Of course, we haven't got this set to the correct position relative to the cord yet. We simply have the cord wrapped around it, so it's just held there by friction. That's the next setting, to get the meter correctly set. And that's got its difficult points. Right, the joy of setting the meter up, adjusting it. Now there's a limit to what you're going to achieve by your adjustments. By our adjustments here, all you can do is you can set it so that the light meter reads correctly at 1 light level. Now if the selenium cell is good, it will work correctly at other light levels. If the selenium cell is bad, you can set the meter to read correctly at one light level, but at other light levels it will not read correctly. And it's very common for the selenium cells to be bad. However, having said that, you've got to start somewhere. So I'll just remove the top cover, and for the sake of it, because of my usual procedure is to set this up on a calibrated light source. So I normally set my meter to ASA 50. Not 40, 50. And I will calibrate that to my light source, and basically what I want to do is the meter will respond to the calibrated light source at the light level as it's set, and I will move the drum around until such stage as my yellow follower needle is in the correct position, that it mirrors the needle here when my shutter speeds and aperture settings are where they should be for that light level. And I'll go and do that now. I'll come back and I'll tell you how we go. Well, I set that up against my calibrated light source, and it all appears to work just as it should do. In my case, I set it up, it should have registered at ASA 50. I should have 125th of a second. It should show F8, and the follower needle should be directly over the white meter needle, and that's how I've got it set at the moment. Of course, the drum is not tied to the cord at this stage. The cord's just wrapped around the drum. So it's a simple matter of turning the drum with your finger until the follower needle sits in the position it should do for the light level you're trying to register. If, for example, you were using light from a bright sunny day, using the sunny 16 rule, you would set your, say for example, set your shutter speed, your film speed to say 125th of a second. And if you set your shutter speed to 125th of a second, if your aperture was set to f16, your follower needle should fall directly above the white meter needle if you are metering an average scene. So that's another way of going about it. Or you can just compare it. If you've got a known good meter, you can use that for your comparison. But basically what you're wanting to do is move your meter drum at the top here relative to the cable until the follower needle registers correctly against the settings that you see here. That's all done. In my case, that's all done. Now the next trick is we need to lock the cord to the cable drum. So how do you go about doing that? Well, this is a bit fraught. First thing to do is mark the position of the cable drum and the cord with a marker pen so that you know that you haven't slipped when you start to rotate this thing. The notches in this drum, in my case, are somewhere around the corner here in an inconvenient position. I need to rotate that drum until those notches in the drum are at the back here where that little cutout is. So let me do that. Right. Now my two little notches are visible here and here. What I have to do is the lower cable, the lower cord, I need to lift that up and over the top of the upper cord to get it out of the way. I've got two dressmaker's pins here. I'll use that to get underneath the cord. And lift that cord over the top of the upper cord. So you can see what I've done there. I've lifted the cord from the bottom up over the top of the upper one, so it's out of the way. The next trick is to get the cord that's the upper cord, the one that's still sitting in place, we need to get that tucked in underneath where that notch is. So again, I'm just using my dressmaker's pins in there to get under that cord. And I need to get that underneath that lip. And I need to do this without knocking the meter off the top of the camera, because of course it's enthusiastic to fall off the camera. I'm using a toothpick here to help me prod that cord around so that I'm not cutting through the edge of it with anything sharp. Here's another one. Got one end of it tucked in nicely. With a bit of poking and prodding, I've got both ends of that cord tucked up in the gap so that it's locked in place now. And the cord that we originally sat at the bottom and that we've moved out of the way, I've got to push that back into place. It's sitting correctly at one end, not the other end. Let's get this rolled over. That's it. So what I've got there is my meter drum is now tied to the cord because the cord's tucked in there. It means that my meter settings are now set. Let me put the top back on that camera before anything unfortunate happens. And I can put this to one side and look at my rangefinder. Okay, so that's safe now. My meter's sitting safely on the camera body. I've got the meter setting correct. And the top cover's just there to keep everything in place, because what I need to do is look at the rangefinder and get ready to clean this.